Hey, I'm sorry for my late video to you guys and that I couldn't meet you guys in person. My schedule and I've just been busy, but let's get started. So I'm going to be presenting about Jesus feeding the 5,000, which is questionably the most important miracle because it's the only one other than his resurrection that is mentioned in all four Gospels. The accounts do differ. Obviously, they should. Otherwise, why would we want to read all four? Why would we have four different books of the same thing? Anyway, it occurs to me that in all of them, John the Baptist had just died. And Jesus' reaction to John the Baptist dying was that he wanted to go away to a remote place. Probably to have some introspection, some time with God to help himself, be right in the spirit. And so there's that pre-lying circumstance. But then Mark talks about how the disciples have been going out on these missions. They were sent 2 by 2 out on these missions. All right, and Mark talks about how they were tired. That they came, they told Jesus what they saw, what they had done, and that they were tired and they had not had the chance to eat. In all of the Gospels, in fact, it talks about how when Jesus told them, let's go and retreat to a more remote area for rest and so that you guys can eat and so on and so forth, they all talk about how he had compassion on the crowd. This was his motivating factor. He saw this crowd of people and he had compassion on them. And he began to preach, teach, and heal all day, okay, all the way until the evening, right? And as the evening approached, as the evening approached, at some point the disciples came to him. They may have been having a conversation. It seems to me like maybe they were talking amongst themselves and he knew about it beforehand. But at some point they come to him and they address the fact that it's getting dark, that the crowd needs to disperse. They need to go home. They need to have a place to eat. They need to get food and sleep. And Jesus' reaction is basically just like, they don't have to leave. You feed them. And immediately gave authority to the disciples and said, you do something about this. But of course, the disciples being man like yourself and myself, immediately their thoughts gravitated towards, wait, this is going to cost way too much money. How are we going to buy food, right? Thinking in the natural. Well, that's what we do. But that's not what God does. That's not what Jesus does. And again, he directs them to find out how much food they have. So the action is in the disciples. Again, the disciples find out who has the bread. Of course, it happens to be this kid whose mom is just brilliant and packed him lunch, and he had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And all he did was thank God for the supplication. He just thanked him for the food and thanked him for there being enough. It doesn't say this. It just says that he thanked God, that he gave thanks to God. Pretty sure he gave thanks to God, not for enough for the one boy, but enough for the whole crowd, including himself, right? And so all he did was give thanks to God. He broke the loaves in half and he separated the fish. I personally don't believe that he broke the bread and all of a sudden it multiplied. And the disciples had to come and get baskets and baskets and baskets and baskets upon baskets of bread. I don't think that's what happened. I believe that the disciples took the bread and the fish, right? And they were dispersing it and it just didn't deplete. It was the disciples' action that was enabling this miracle to happen. It was their faith in Jesus and Jesus' faith in God and their action in passing it out that caused it to not deplete to the point that there were 12 baskets left over. And I also want to point out, kind of ironic, that there are 12 disciples and they originally started out hungry. I think that Jesus did not have compassion on the crowd. I think Jesus just had compassion. He had compassion on the crowd and the people that were being taught, the people that were potential disciples, as well as the disciple makers. He wanted to supply everyone's needs to the point that each disciple had an entire basket of food, which is more than enough for one meal. And I just think that's crazy and wonderful. And it really illustrates, number one, the principle of multiplication. And number two, God's heart and his compassion and his desire to provide for us. It's like when we are in need and we're like, I don't know how I'm going to pay this bill. I don't know how I'm going to pay this bill. And God is just like, whatever. Tithe and watch it roll, because I can do more with 90% than you can do with 100. It's crazy to me. And what immediately followed is this. Jesus had preached all day long. He had preached all day into the evening. He was already exhausted. His spirit was already burdened because John the Baptist, his cousin and the messenger of Christ, had just been killed just based on a king's promise to some girl. And he was sad and he was tired in the beginning, but yet he rose to the occasion. He didn't look at his physical strength. He didn't look at his physical body. He rose to the occasion and he preached all day and all night to 5,000 people, really more like 15,000 people if you include the women and children. And then only after he sent the disciples off and dispersed the crowds, did he at that point go up to the mountaintop to pray and finally get the spiritual rest that he had been seeking. And you know what came out of that? What came out of that was him walking on the water. And still, even in him walking on the water, we see that he was trying to transfer that authority over to Peter. But Peter doubted. Just like they had doubted before when they said we didn't have enough money, he doubted and he began to sink. But Jesus tried. He tried when he was on this earth to facilitate the authority and to show what it was that we were able to do in God, what it was God's will for us to do when it comes to miracles and when it comes to signs and wonders. And even when he was on the earth, we still had problems swallowing it. We still had problems accepting it. We still had fear creeping in, the enemy creeping in. And so I'm just not surprised. I'm not surprised in 2017 that we have so few people that believe in the ability to work miracles, in the authority of the believer. I am not surprised. And what I want to say to you and to everyone is just read the Gospels. Just read about the miracles and see where that authority is, because he gave it to us. He continuously tried to teach us to take the authority that was rightfully ours, and we just didn't understand it. It says in one of the Gospels that their hearts were hardened, and so they could not receive like the true meaning of what the feeding of the 5,000 meant. If their hearts were hardened and he was in their physical flesh, how much more is the world hardened today? How much more important is it for us to recreate these miracles? That's the question that I leave you with. How much more important is it?